Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paul O'Brien. For anyone seeking a greater spiritual dimension to their lives, it can be challenging to find the best teacher or the right path forward. But today's guest suggests that when the student is open and ready to pay attention, teachers appear everywhere as needed. We are going to examine the story of his lifelong quest to learn and evolve physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Our guest today is Dan Millman, author of the new book, a memoir entitled Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit. Dan teaches the peaceful warrior way in the United States and around the world, author of 18 books published in 29 languages, including his best-selling The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. Dan is a former world champion athlete, university coach, martial arts instructor, and college professor. The Way of the Peaceful Warrior was adapted to a feature film starring Nick Nolte. Dan and his wife, Joy, live in Brooklyn, New York. Hello, Dan, and welcome to the Pathways Show.
Hi there, Paul. Glad to be visiting with you again.
Well, your latest book is a memoir, and I love autobiographies. What motivated you to pen one?
Well, I'm 76 years old now. I have more to look back on than forward to, quite objectively. And it seemed like the right time. It's a culminating work. It may be my last book. I may just continue to teach where I'm invited online and in person, but I think it feels right. 18 books with this memoir. I wanted to get it after I had perspective on my life, after all the years of writing, about 40 years, and before I lost some memories. So it seemed like that sweet spot in my life to write the true story of my spiritual search, because I left things a little mysterious and vague in Way of the Peaceful Warrior, as you may recall. So this is the story behind the story. And I need to say that I have no hubris in terms of assuming legions of people want to read about this Dan Millman character, especially if they haven't really heard of me or my work. But I think many of us are interested in the spiritual quest. Whether we'd use that language or not, I believe we're all on a quest for fulfillment, meaning, purpose, direction. And I define spiritual really as that which uplifts or inspires, the big picture of life, as if standing on a mountaintop looking at a panoramic view. Everything looks more beautiful in the distance, because spirituality is otherwise very difficult to define. It's the will to transcend, to rise above. And that's what that's what the particulars of my quest are about. But I think we all have our own path in that sense.
You know, you write, quote, every human being is on a spiritual quest, but not all of us are aware of it. Who among us does not seek fulfillment, meaning, and an understanding of our place in the universe?
Right.
That's such a great quote. It kind of sums it up. What made you feel ready to become a teacher, to teach people about life's big questions?
Well, I started out teaching what I knew, which was physical training as a kid, helping my friends on the trampoline, which actually was some sophisticated analysis and biomechanics to make it sound more fancy. But figuring things out, how does this work? And if you can do that in the physical realm, especially a more complicated realm like gymnastics, which I did as a coach at Stanford University, everything else seems a little easier because you're working with the mind, the body, the emotions, the spirit, if you will. So let me just grab something here. Okay. So I began teaching what I knew. It was only after a certain amount of time that my interest expanded out of the gymnasium, beyond how do you create talent for sports, into what life skills can create more talent for everyday life.
Right.
And I visited the metaphysical realms and so on in my own quest. But eventually I came back to earth, and I realized that daily life is our school and our training ground.
You know, you say that most people are searching for ways to help them feel good more of the time and feel bad less of the time. And then you write, when I wrote The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, it seemed to me that the pot of gold at the end of every rainbow was the promise of happiness. Since that time, I've come to believe that what we most desire is a sense of worth and meaning, connection and purpose. So you're all
Mhm.
about purpose. Can you speak to that?
Well, yes, I've written 4 books on the subject: The Life You Were Born to Live, Living on Purpose, The 4 Purposes of Life. Um, and so I do find, and I didn't strategize this. It wasn't an idea, gee, I'll talk about purpose or write about purpose, but it became central. As I wrote, I always surprised myself what books come up. They're like planes on a fog-shrouded runway waiting to take off. And it seems to me that we're hardwired goal seekers. When I look at my youngest grandchild when she was tiny, an infant, crawling across the floor, she wasn't doing that to get some exercise. She wanted something, her big brother's toy, whatever it was. And so I think even from the beginning, we're most satisfied, absorbed, happy, fulfilled when we're moving towards something. Um, in fact, in the Peaceful Warrior movie, there was a scene, Paul, that the character Dan, after hiking up this big hill with the character of Socrates, played by Nolte, Dan has this realization. He says, Socrates, it's really the journey that makes us happy, not the destination, which there's some truth in that. Most of our lives are spent on the journey. And yet, without a destination in mind, there is no journey. We just wander around. So from our point A, we need a point B. And so I came to define success as making progress toward a meaningful goal,
Right.
a
You
goal that's
say that
meaningful to us.
you say that humans are hardwired for goal seeking.
Yeah.
I find that interesting right now in my life because I'm trying to define new goals for myself, and then I'm thinking, why bother? And you've actually given a pretty good rationale for why bother in your book, and I really appreciate that. And you write, since inspiration passes and motivation comes and goes, I stopped seeking or relying on either one when it was time to write or exercise or do whatever else I needed to do. That's why I recommend to others what I do myself. Choose a goal and then apply effort over time. Dream big, but start small and connect the dots. And that is so interesting because most people have a hard time doing that. Is that a matter of self discipline?
Well, we've all done many things when we weren't motivated to do it.
Right.
How many of us have taken out the trash, done our homework, our schoolwork, gone to the office when we weren't really in the mood? So the idea that we have to rely on motivation, I think, is basically not very functional. There was a man named Shoma Morita, a Japanese psychiatrist, who said that he said, when running up a hill, it's okay to quit, to give up as many times as you want, as long as your feet keep moving. In other words, it was a behaviorist type approach that what counts in our lives is not just having the right feelings, the right emotions, the right positive thoughts, and all that, because those we have less control by our will over what thoughts are entering our awareness, that pop into our awareness, or what feelings pass through us like the weather. We have more control over what we actually do, how we move our arms and legs, our mouth, speech, which is an action. So that's why I think the most important question any of us can ever ask ourselves is, what do I need to do, or what is my purpose in this moment? We
Right.
may not know our purpose in 10 years or 15 years, but we always know our purpose in this moment. I know my purpose right now. I think you know your purpose too. So if we focus on what needs doing, what is my goal right now, and exert effort in that direction. And I don't mean straining by effort. I mean just direct focus our mind, attention, and body on what we need to do. And it really does simplify life. That's my experience.
You'd never know it to look at all of the YouTube videos on motivation and positive thinking. You'd think
Mhm.
it's really a matter of changing your thoughts, controlling your feelings, taking
Right.
responsibility for your thoughts and your feelings and modifying them. And that's the
Mhm.
secret of success. And
Yeah.
you really have some really down to earth advice here for people, which is more along the lines of, hey, just do it. If it's something that's in alignment with your goal, or with a
Mhm.
chosen goal, just do it. whether you feel like it or not. And it seems like a bitter pill to swallow, but it's probably something that you get used to and that becomes easier over time. Would you agree with that?
Yes, maybe you've heard of Jack LaLanne. He was a
Of
famous
course.
fitness coach.
Yeah.
You remember Jack?
Yeah.
Well, Jack, I worked out with him once at Santa Monica Beach. We were doing some workout on the parallel bars, and I loved his saying. He said, "I hate to exercise, but I love the results."
Uh-huh.
And that really speaks to me. Everybody assumes, oh, well, Jack's one of those exercise people. He loves it. No, he doesn't. But he does it because he likes the results. And we can't guarantee, and that's one of the other things I learned along the journey with 4 mentors I mentioned, of course, in the memoir. One of the things I learned was that we have no control over outcomes in our life. We can't control whether we sink that putt, find love, success, or whatever. We can't guarantee that. But by making a good effort in that desired direction, we vastly increase the odds of getting the results we'd like over not making the effort. What was it, Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan who said, you make 0% of the shots you don't take?
I think it
So
was
that's
Gretzky, yeah.
Yeah, it probably was Gretzky. It could have been either one, but that's what it comes down to. And it seems cavalier just to say, just do it. Someone says, I'm an alcoholic. You're just saying, just stop drinking. Well, the fact is, eventually, if someone's going to overcome their addiction, go into remission and recovery, they're eventually going to do that. They're going to stop drinking.
Right.
So as difficult as it may be, some people need a long process in weeks, months, or years. They wax and wane, they have relapses, but eventually they do the action or don't do the action, and it changes their lives. So just do it doesn't mean instant accomplishment. It means take action in the desired direction. That's why I say dream big, but start small. And then just connect the dots step by step. That's what's worked for me.
And be okay with the fact that you're going to fail many times.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
You
sure.
define failure as a stepping stone in your book. And
well, I used to fail 50 times a day in the gym. I'd crash and crash, try a move, mess up again. But I knew eventually if I kept trying, I would refine it and achieve it. And that's what happened. So I had a totally different relationship to failure that most people do. I was used to it. Yeah. And all the way to the world championship. Yeah.
I really enjoyed your sharing of your experience with your 4 mentors in your life, the 4 major mentors that you had in your life. And they were all different types. They were different types of people with different types of expertise. But what I thought was really cool was the fact that you didn't make like a lifetime commitment. You basically maintain a sense of your own integrity and your own identity that didn't depend upon being, told what to do. I thought you were very discriminating with each of them, and they lasted for a period. Can you describe that process of because a lot of people feel like, well, you got to find the right guru and and make a commitment for life, kind of thing. Explain how you did it differently.
Well, one of the central tenets that I teach today in this approach to living, I call the Peaceful Warrior's Way, is that there's no best teacher, no best book, no best philosophy or religion or diet or system of exercise. There is only the best for each of us at a given time of our life. So we can change over time. So a lifetime commitment makes no sense. Maybe we like the idea of giving up our lives to somebody or something, some cause, but people do change and evolve over time. So I think it's important to stay current of what serves us best right now. And it's a tremendous respect for each individual's process. Now, these 4 mentors, I think I was meant to write this book one day. And I think my commitment to share what I had learned with other people opened me up to finding these particular 4 heavy-hitting teachers. And yes, radically different approaches to the spiritual quest, which is why I can be of value to others in sharing my experiences, what attracted me to each of these mentors. The first I called the professor. Oscar Ichaza was his name. He had a school called the Eureka School.
Right.
And as you know, and then, and I wasn't just collecting initiations. In other words, I spent 20 years one teacher after the next, a long period of time. I spent 8 years with the man I called the guru, known as Adi Da, but he had many different names. And he had a very different approach than the technology presented by the professor. He stepped back out of the picture and let us experience the school he had developed. I started with a 40-day, 10-hour-a-day training. How many people have time today to do that? And then advanced trainings and so on followed, and I started teaching for this Eureka school. And then the guru, though, said, I'd rather beat you with a stick than tell you to meditate your way to enlightenment. He was a radically different approach. It was really sitting with the divine shining through his form, his physical form. Now, I don't want to idealize and say I went in with my eyes open, but that's what I recommend today, that we begin any new experience, whether it's a spiritual technology, a method, a school, is to go in with your heart open, but your eyes open as well. And again, as you suggested, be aware that there may be some good things and bad things. In fact, one of the recurring themes of the book is that every teacher is human, and every human has foibles or flaws. And that includes me. I've tried to keep mine, with the help of my dear wife of 46 years, Joy, try to keep my flaws and foibles manageable. But every teacher has flaws. And the idea of projecting a perfect master, I think, is a little childlike.
Right.
Because these are human beings. And if we go in with that understanding, then we're not so disillusioned. We don't put them up on pedestals. But I spent 8 years almost with the guru. Joy was with me the whole way. And as you know, she weighed in with her own comments in the process of the book.
I love her comments in the book. She's brilliant and so human and so warm. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
What a great partner for you.
Well, Joy, I did 9 drafts of this book, and she read every single one. And around the 7th draft, she said, Dan, I have a little different perspective. What if I wrote something? And I said, that's a great idea. Please do it. So she wrote what she had to say, and we just did, minor edits, just like my editor edits me for readability. And there you have it. And she was with me she was also a teacher for Eureka with a professor. She also was with me those 8 years with the guru. And then I found the warrior priest. Now, how I left each teacher when the time came, I describe that very clearly, of course, in the book, because it's important for people to know what attracted me, because they might relate to that, but also why I decided to move on. And then I found the warrior priest, and he was a major jumping point. I only knew him for really a year or two, but during that time, he really provided my calling and woke me up again to my own sense of inner trust. He called himself a cheerleader to the soul, which is what I like to call myself as well, and reminded us. He said, I'm not here for you to trust me. I'm here to help you trust yourself. And that was a very different experience that I needed at the time. But we did things like a knife fighting training for spiritual development, growth, and insight and self-knowledge, and making significant shifts in one's life. It sounds bizarre, but people came from all over the world. I taught this for 14 years. And so I went through that phase, and also the life purpose material. Some people who know my work, such as The Life You Were Born to Live, that system came originally, the basics of it, from the warrior priest. And then I expanded considerably on what I had learned from him in the 7 or 8 years before I wrote the book. And then finally, now I felt I was no longer looking for teachers. I felt I'd have the heavy hitters. But synchronicity and other circumstances, I ended up discovering the man I call the sage, who was the 4th of my 4 primary mentors. And he brought me essentially down to earth again, into reality. There's a saying, Barbara Rasp once wrote, the lesson is simple, the student is complicated. And he helped me to become less complicated and get some real functional results in everyday life, and reminded me of what's truly important.
That reminds me of a slogan I heard when I lived in India for a year, and I heard this poet on TV. He said, it's simple to be happy, but it's difficult to be simple.
I like that.
I wanted to ask you something. I think one of the great lessons in your book that I took away from it and was how you have these major influences, these major teachers that you opened yourself up to and that you learned so much from in different ways, as you've described in the book. And then the time came when it was time to move on and time to leave them. And that's really in contrast to people who, feel like, well, I've got to find the right answers and I've got to stick to it forever. They become what you called, they cling to their untethered beliefs and conspiracy theories. And this was something that Oscar Icharo taught you, that these, what do you call it? Blind belief, the opposite of enlightenment, characterized by deep-rooted fear, tense muscles, pent-up violence, and a total identification with beliefs disconnected to reality. And according to Oscar, a large portion of humanity is struggling at this level. And you write, I found that statement hard to believe until decades later. I saw how millions of people still cling to untethered beliefs and conspiracy theories. And we're living in the golden age of conspiracy theories right now, I think. It's just amazing how attached people get to their current beliefs. And I wrote in my book, Intuitive Intelligence, I wrote about a chapter called Belief Engineering, where I'm saying beliefs are just current operating assumptions. They're useful, they're important, but they're not sacred, and they need to be tested and upgraded. But people don't see it that way. They think it's a strength of character to never change your mind.
Yes, when someone asks me, well, what are your beliefs about this, Dan? I say it doesn't matter. We all have beliefs. We all have opinions. They're like neighbors. Everybody's got one. But really, what matters is what we bring into the world, how we behave, kindness with other people in our environment. Those kinds of things are more meaningful and impactful. And if we look back on our lives, even though somebody might ascribe an achievement to believing in something, that may be, or the right emotion or the right thought, ultimately, our lives are shaped by what we do moment to moment.
Right. Yeah, well, what we do is influenced by our beliefs, certainly. If I don't believe I can do a somersault on the trampoline, guess what? I'm not going to pull it off. Yeah, I think it's a really great point that you make. Now, I have this question to ask about mentors. And do mentors have to be human? I mean, you've had at least four primary ones, but do you think mentors have to be human?
Absolutely not. I don't. We've all had role models and mentors and teachers. Maybe we all remember one or two teachers who stood out for us in middle school or high school or even college, who demanded our best, who inspired us or uplifted us or really got us. So we've all had teachers and role models in our lives. Not everybody has to have these four particular kinds of mentors, but they represent different aspects of the spiritual path. And my primary teacher has always been the world of nature, for example. I relate the story in the book about how I learned a significant lesson that shifted my behavior and was a lasting lesson from watching a cloud drift across the sky. So books can be major teachers for us. Any influence in our lives where we learn something. Now, how do we know we've learned something? There are only two ways to know that we've actually learned something. Either our behavior changes or our perspectives expand.
Yeah.
If we have a change of perspective or a change of behavior, or both, ideally, we know we've really learned something.
Right. Now, does it take a lifetime to achieve a peaceful heart and a warrior spirit? I mean, how would you guide others treading the same or similar paths?
Well, I would hope so. We're all seeking to live with a more peaceful heart, a sense of equanimity or serenity amidst the chaos and changes of everyday life. Look at today, look at the news, with not only the pandemic today as we speak, but the war in Ukraine. There's always something going on that can stress people. And, some of my seminars, I go into how to unstress, how to have stress be a minor impact in our lives, how to ameliorate the impacts of stress. So these things happen. And meanwhile, what's under our control, which is what we do in front of us in this moment. And so that's where life can. That's where we learn. That's our learning point. That's our point of power.
Well, you know,
And again, yeah.
I think you're a great teacher, Dan, because you're so practical. You're so down to earth. You've got this humility combined with a strong sense of self. How long are you going to keep doing this? How long are you going to keep teaching and writing for the?
Well, as long as I can. And yes, to answer your question, it does take a lifetime. I'm still practicing. We're all peaceful warriors in training in the School of Daily Life. By the way, I used to be more humble until I came across a quote by Golda Meir. She said, "Stop acting so humble. You're not that great."
I love that. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last question. What would you like your readers to take away from the lessons in your book?
Well, overall, I think it's a trust in their own process.
Right.
And that sounds like a slogan, but it truly, deeply, is to stop comparing ourselves to other people, which is a disrespect for ourselves. We can't write a book commensurate to Shakespeare, but we can write a book by us. And we're here to live our lives, not someone else's. These young people today get very depressed because they see all their friends showing their best self on Facebook or Instagram or chat, right. Snapchat, whatever. And we need to start living our life and trusting our process. When I was a young coach, some people took longer to learn a somersault than others. But those who took longer to learn often learned it better than those who learned it quicker. So we have to respect our way of learning and our way of living.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us on Pathways today. There's so much more we could talk about and explore, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. And I want to be sure to tell our listeners about your website where they can get a lot more information about your work, your books, your workshops, etc., which is www.peacefulwarrior.com. And for those who may have tuned into Pathways late today, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. And don't worry, you can play and or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today we've been visiting with Dan Millman, author of Peaceful Heart, Warrior Spirit. And in my view, one of the most useful and practical teachers of our time, and I'm so grateful that we had him on the show. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at www.kboo.fm every other Sunday morning at 8:30 USA Pacific Time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com, and that's spelled D-I-V-I, nation.com, as well as via iTunes, my YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Dan Millman and to all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.